Hi, I'm Kevin Glen-Drake. In our joinery saw overview, I outlined the difference between the geometry on a Japanese saw and the geometry on a Western saw. I also pointed out some of the features of the saw that we make here at the Glen-Drake Toolworks. Those features include tooth-free zones at the front and back of the blade that facilitate maintaining cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged, a variable pitch that ramps into and out of the coarsest part of the cut, and replaceable interchangeable blades. Now I'm here at my bench to show you how our saw works and to give you some pointers on how to practice. Even after a power saw has ramped up to speed, it's possible to stall a power saw by feeding the wood into the blade with excessive force. And we can stall a hand saw the same way, by feeding the saw into the wood with a force that cannot be supported by the cutting velocity. Here's how that looks and sounds. I'm stalling the saw by applying too much downward force for the velocity that I'm using. If I were to do that with a hand plane, it would look like this. Pushing down instead of forward stalls the plane. If we simply move the plane forward, the weight of the plane is enough to keep it from flying off the planet. And please note that the plane is moving both before and after it cuts. All I am doing is moving the plane forward with enough force to maintain cutting velocity while the blade is engaged. Our saw works exactly the same way. It moves before and after we cut, and the weight of the saw is enough to keep it from lifting off the work. All you have to do is move the saw forward with enough force to maintain cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged. And please note that I'm going all the way through the cut on the first stroke. I see no difference between the first stroke and the last stroke. Here's the first stroke, and here is the last stroke. They are both exactly the same. If we want to be aggressive with a hand saw, we certainly can be. But the first thing we have to do is add velocity. A little more velocity, a little more pressure. And if I really crank it up, we can be very aggressive with the hand saw. But when we slow down, we have to relieve the pressure, otherwise the saw will stall. Sound is a critical indicator of how a tool is performing. I prefer to work without any background noise because I want to hear what's going on. To illustrate the sound factor, consider the attitude of a saw if you are ripping a board on a sawhorse. You are clearly sawing with the grain. If you turn that wood up 90 degrees and put it in a vise, then if you don't change anything else, you are not sawing with the grain, you are sawing against the grain. And here's what that looks and sounds like. That's a terrible sound, and it feels even worse. Now, here's the sound of sawing with the grain. Against the grain, with the grain. Here are some more sounds to listen for. Here's a traditional saw sound. Here's the sound of a saw starting off the teeth and stopping on the teeth. Here's the sound of a saw starting on the teeth and stopping off the teeth. And here's the sound we want to hear. This is the sound of a saw starting off the teeth and stopping off the teeth. That's the sound that indicates that you are maintaining cutting velocity while the teeth are engaged. You may have also noticed that I'm using a slight pumping motion when I saw. This is a very natural movement that has some interesting ramifications. When the cut begins, I'm removing material from the far side with the fine pitch at the front of the blade. During the middle of the cut, I'm removing material from the whole piece using the coarsest part of the blade, and at the end of the stroke, I'm removing material from the near side using the fine pitch at the back of the blade. This pumping motion produces a very aggressive cut, which is entirely appropriate for the pitch on each part of the blade. I'm sure you've also noticed that the handle on our saw is angled down. This angle is such that when your arm is level, the blade is level. So if you are sawing down to a line, when you get to that line, simply level out your arm, take a few more light strokes to make sure the kerf is down to the line on the far side as well. Now let's take a look at how to practice sawing to a line. When I watch people practice sawing, I typically see them draw a line and try to follow it. But consider this. I am a recovering musician, so I can tell you that if you see a musical note on a piece of paper and you cannot sound the note on your instrument, then seeing it on the paper does not help you. I feel the same way about lines on a piece of wood. Lines are just telling us where to saw. They're not telling us how to saw at all. If we cannot saw straight and square, then knowing where we're supposed to do it doesn't help us. When we practice without lines, we begin to see and feel some other things, like the angle of the saw to the work and how our bodies are moving. How our bodies move is of primary importance here. If I position my eye and then position the saw, there is a risk that support for the saw will not be lined up. Support comes from our forearm, and if our forearm is not lined up with the back of the saw, then as our arm goes forward, our wrist straightens out. As it comes back, it collapses. The solution is to establish support for the saw and take your body to the cut. That will ensure that your wrist is stable. A good way to check your support is to stop occasionally and release the saw. If the saw stays stable, then your hand is following the saw. If the saw wobbles when you stop, then you know that you're forcing the saw to follow your hand. I would also point out that if you grip a tool, it will stay where you grip it. The best way to ensure that you are going to make a vertical cut is to relax with your saw and let the saw find vertical. I like to hold the saw so that it dead ends in the palm of my hand. Then I can drive the saw with my arm and relax my grip. Observing all of that then, practice sawing 3 things without lines. The first thing to practice is sawing square. For that, you need only make 1 or 2 strokes. Judge the line and check with a square. If it's not square, that's okay, as long as the square confirms what you thought you saw. The next thing to check is sawing straight. It's the same process. And the third thing to practice is moving the balance between the velocity and the pressure you are applying up and down. More velocity, more pressure. Less velocity, less pressure. More. Finally, combine all 3 exercises into one, judge the result, and test it. When you think you're ready, go ahead and draw a line and follow it. One final word on practice. If you need to make something, then go ahead and make it any way you can. but save some time for practice. Projects do not typically increase our skill levels because we are never willing to put a project at risk. When we're willing to burn the result, then we can focus on improving our skills. It's very simple, really. The more we practice, the better we get. That's it for this segment. In our next segment, I will be demonstrating our offset layout technique. That technique facilitates measuring assembly clearances on hand-cut joinery for a perfect off-the-saw fit every time. Thank you for joining us.